Now, SARS Commissioner Kieswetter joins us for his reaction to the passing of former Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, Tito Mboweni. Commissioner, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening. Can you give us your reflections on the passing of Mr. Mboweni?
Thank you, Gatleho. For me, the passing of Tito Mboweni is indeed an untimely and all too sudden loss to our democracy. You know, we forget that he was a 35-year-old when he joined cabinet as the first Minister of Labour, and I was privileged to meet him then when he spoke about the thinking that had to go into crafting the new labour laws. But he always came across as one who was deeply rooted in practical outcomes that, instead of being lost in ideological rhetoric. Working with him was a pleasure. He was clear. He might have been unconventional in many ways. I remember sitting in a restaurant the day Cabinet made the decision to appoint me, and listening to, watching the then Twitter feed coming up and announcing that I had been appointed before he had called me. And minutes after that, I got the call from him, and he said, "Oh, I just want to tell you that Cabinet has appointed you as the Commissioner. Well done. We'll meet each other soon." He says, "By the way, I didn't know that so many people knew you, and I'm looking forward to working with you." And that was, for me, the first time we had worked together, but directly. But I also saw him in action as a equally young governor, or governor number 8, as he called himself. You know, we also should remind ourselves that under the presidency of Thabo Mbeki, the Finance Ministry under Trevor Manuel, and Tito Mboweni, we called it the 3 TMs, or TM3. We had an experience, one of the most stable and probably arguably one of the most economically prosperous decade of our 30-year democracy. Under their stewardship, we were able, balancing tough fiscal policies with tough monetary policies, we were able to create fiscal space that has stood us in good stead. And so for me, the contribution of Tito Mboweni is beyond any question. I remember him and will remember him as a meritocrat of serious note and absolutely the most non-racial South African I have ever met. Let me give you one example. When I reconstituted the executive committee at Eskom, I called him and I gave him the names. And the first few names were names of African colleagues. And he stopped me halfway and he said, "I hope you are not only going to appoint African people to your exco. You must choose people who are able to do the work regardless of their race." And I was therefore very pleased that I had a balanced executive committee. But that was him. His heart was in the right place. He might have been unconventional. You know, we hear about the Mahubuk's stories, especially during COVID. And he might have had certain quirks, like not wanting unposed photographs. And you hear stories about him saying, if you invite me to a function, I don't speak to fewer than 800 people. And these are just the colorful stories of a man who no one can argue his heart was in the right place. And his contribution, whether as a Minister of Labour in those early days of our democracy, later on as governor, and then he disappeared into private sector, as many of us have done, and returning as a reluctant Minister of Finance, has served our country exceptionally well.
Most certainly. I mean, you describe his period as the most economically stable period in our democracy. Talk to us about what truly stands out for you in terms of his impact on the economic landscape during his tenure.
Well, one of the things that he followed in line with some of his successors was to be unyielding about maintaining fiscal integrity and over time ensure that we do not become reliant on institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF, because Tito always knew that the real strength of our democracy was not that we could proudly stand under our South African flag and sing the national anthems, as evocative and as proud as we stand when we do that. But the ultimate essence of our democracy is that a government that is well-resourced, well-funded, which is also why he gave me unstinting support as a commissioner, and whatever support he could give us, I always looked to that, and I knew that he had my back. So for me, that remaining committed, even, as things here, we often hear about the banter when the budget is discussed with the ruling party then, and, as politicians do, they have a list of demands and needs much longer than what can be funded. And he would hold his line. He would not give in to it. Whether it was the negotiations on the salary bill of public servants, which we know is a huge cost on our budget, whether it was the extent to which inefficient at the time and non-profitable state-owned enterprises should be funded, he held his line. And I guess his training as an economist and as someone who, as governor, understood how money works, knew that it didn't grow on trees. So for me, his huge contribution, yes, the founding principles of the labor laws that we still today experience, trying to address all of the inequities that we inherited from the oppression that preceded our democratic freedom. That was obviously a landmark contribution. But for me, both as governor and as Minister of Finance, however brief that was, it was his understanding that over time you need to lay a foundation of fiscal integrity. One of the things he did, for example, was to say, we cannot simply raise taxes if we need more money. And he gave an indication, well ahead of its time, that he wanted to he wanted to reduce the corporate income tax rate so that it could approach the OECD norms internationally, because he knew that would be the best for our country and also good for future investment. And he took a bold decision that he would begin to do that, and the first installment was to drop the rate from 28 to 27%. And he also then came to us as colleagues in Treasury and SARS to say we have to fund that reduction by broadening the tax base and decreasing the opportunity for companies to arbitrage and to abuse certain tax laws like assessed losses and other areas of transfer pricing that was often areas that created tax leakage. So he was a consummate professional who understood the work that he had to do, gave us as his colleagues clear direction, and then got out of the way to allow us to do the work that we were employed to do.
All right, Commissioner, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your stories with us with regards to the passing of Tito Mboweni. Speaking, they're saying that he had practical outcomes and was never lost in ideological rhetoric. Thank you so much for your time, sir.